Okay, so before we begin our gathering, we'd like to acknowledge that this wonderful event, Exploring Diversity, is being hosted on the traditional, unceded, and beautiful territory of the Stalo people, the people of the river. As many of you know, unceded ancestral territory is a land base that has never been surrendered or relinquished in any way or in any manner. We raise our hands and give thanks for the many bounties of this land. Thank you. We pledge to work on truth and reconciliation as many are settlers to this land. We recognize that the land we are currently upon is the traditional territory of the Matsqui peoples. And we'd like to acknowledge our closest neighbors, which are the Sumas and the Kwantlen peoples. Acknowledging territory dates back I would say before contact, so more than hundreds and hundreds of years for traditional people. Today, when universities Today, when universities and other organizations acknowledge Indigenous territory that they work and live in, it is a profound act of respect. Acknowledgement plays an important and integral role in the ongoing journey of reconciliation. As we open our hearts and our minds, it's the beginning of a learning process. One that as an Indigenous person is near and dear to my heart. Acknowledging territories tells visitors and Stalo members themselves that their culture, identity, and way of knowing is important to us and has a place of honor. My name is Emily Henry. My traditional name is Kichi Tebakop Esko Teowa Squeo. I'm going to invite Nav to say that. On behalf of the Alumni Association, I want to thank you for being here tonight as we celebrate and explore diversity. I'd like to thank the panelists for sharing their gifts and talents with us. And I'd like to thank the moderator for her time. We'd like also to thank the Reach Gallery for being such a gracious host to this important discussion. And it's a beautiful atmosphere, so welcoming. I'd like to acknowledge some visiting dignitaries. And so as much as I asked Nav to do my name, now I'm going to mess up yours. So, Viran Bajan, Chair. He's visiting us from India. This is so exciting. He's the UFV Alumni Association of the Chandahar chapter of UFV. And it's so exciting to meet you tonight. Anita Nelson, who's the Executive Director. Anita? Can I get you to stand, Anita? No pressure. So she's shy. She's the UFV advancement. I'm trying to stretch out these words so she comes out. In alumni relations. I think you all met her when you came in anyway. So thank you, Anita. Rex Leonard, who's the treasurer of the Reach Gallery Museum Board of Directors. So Rex? Hi, Rex. So we'd like to thank the South Asian Studies, BC Alliance for Arts and Culture and the Alumni Association for working collaboratively to make this exciting gathering happen. I really love the fan. You can continue. So I was talking to Nav earlier, and we were talking about what exactly cultural and diversity means. And I thought of, as we were discussing it, I thought of a quote that I read recently, so I want to read you something. My people will sleep for 100 years, but when they awake, it'll be the artists who give them back their spirits back, and that's Louis Riel. And it's so true. When we think about art, I feel like it's ingrained in our identity. For Indigenous people, art, our way of knowing, our Indigenous way of being, was something we couldn't celebrate for 75 years, and it was part of the Indian Act. It was such a joy to know this event was going to happen, this important discussion that was going to happen, because we have become so diverse, and that is what Canada's about. Is when we come into the room, we see in the next room, we see that welcoming figure, and it says welcome to the Reach, and we see that replicated in different organizations. That is art. That's telling us we're welcome. It helps us to awaken our spirits. It helps us to understand who we are and where we're going. It's beautiful to see it reflected in so many cultures, and what we're going to be doing tonight is hearing from those who help awaken so many people and so many spirits. And I just want to say thank you to them. So I would like to begin by inviting up the BC Alliance for Arts and Cultural Executive Director Brenda Leadley to provide some remarks about this evening.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. And that beautiful welcome, thank you so much. At the BC Alliance, we're an arts service organization that advocates for the arts. We try to build public will and help people understand what the real value is to the arts, because I believe they're sort of at the very heart, the very heartbeat of who we are and how we create and how we become ourselves. So not surprisingly that they're at the very heart of Indigenous culture. We work very hard to reconcile, work with reconciliation. We try to work with decolonization of ourselves, which is always really challenging. But it's a process, and we're on a journey. I invite you, if you don't know about the BC Alliance, to just check out the website. We have a lot of information and a lot of things that are happening in the cultural sector. We look at research, we look at, there's a lot of communication, a lot of news of things that are happening around the Lower Mainland and around sometimes Canada and the world. So it's the allianceforarts.com. So thank you for inviting me, Nav, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Brenda, for sharing those important words. Next, I'd like to invite UFV South Asian Studies Institute Coordinator Sharajit Sandahar to come up and share a few words. And I know I massacred your name.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm going to keep it very short and sweet. I'd like to thank the Reach Gallery Museum Abbotsford and Laura Schneider for always being so incredibly generous with supporting these sorts of wonderful talks. They're critical to the conversation around arts and heritage and who has access to arts and heritage. So thank you so much. The South Asian Studies Institute at the University of the Fraser Valley is always happy to support conversations around diversity and perhaps challenging conversations around diversity. And so thank you so much once again to the Reach, and thank you to the UFV Alumni Association for organizing this event. I'm going to end with one quick request. For those of you who are in attendance today, thank you as well for coming. It's not always easy to make it out on a weekday evening. Your time is also precious. I want to make a request that we support peoples of color in the arts, and it's really critical that we support peoples of color and support BIPOC people of color, so Black, Indigenous peoples of color as well. So when you do leave this space, please make sure that you purchase art or you support artists who are or identify as peoples of color. It's critical that we begin to become more aware of who these artists are, what they're doing, and in what spaces they are doing this. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'd like to just draw your attention to this beautiful, I'm not sure her name, but she's also translating for us. And so thank you so much. It's so wonderful to see you here. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelist moderator for this evening, the Reach's Gallery Museum Executive Director, Laura Schneider. So born and educated in Ontario, Laura Schneider has held the role of curator in other executive roles in the Canadian arts organization from coast to coast. Laura has a strong record of leadership and service in the cultural sector and has worked in a range of setting and including academic and municipal museums and galleries and grassroots nonprofits. Thank you. I will now invite Laura up as the moderator for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, for that beautiful welcome and for emceeing for us this evening. I also want to thank the others who provided a bit of a welcome for us. So thank you, Brenda, for being here and for your support and all that you do at the BC Alliance for Arts and Culture. It's such an important organization in this province. Also a huge thanks to Sassy and to Sharn for her words. And I couldn't echo her more. Our support for BIPOC artists is enormously important in this country, in this province, and in this gallery. I also want to thank our translator for being here. This is a welcome, I think, addition to our talks and certainly part of a quest for greater inclusion here at the Reach. It is my job now to introduce our panelists. And I can't tell you how excited I am to be a part of this conversation and really honored to be asked to moderate this evening. It's an exceptional group of people here who represent an enormous breadth of experience and diverse backgrounds in their practices and also in their upbringings and culture. So working from closest to me to furthest away, I didn't memorize your bio, Sherlock, I apologize. So this is Sherlock Chen. He is an international traveling queer artist whose practice focuses on archiving locational identities through the body and its surrounding environment as an inquiry into the constructs of social structure and humanity. Inspired by more than a decade of traveling experience and extensive study and research of various cultures around the globe, Sherlock is interested in how diverse resources and systems can innovate and develop community relationships amongst different social groups. He is a graduate of the University of the Fraser Valley. He graduated in 2018 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts with distinction. And he has been a director on the board of the Abbotsford Arts Council and has worked as an education programmer here with us at the Reach. So Sherlock has some great ties to the Fraser Valley and right here in this organization. He is currently residing in Vancouver and is a practicing artist and arts administrator with a focus in community arts development. So please help me welcome Sherlock Chen. Sitting next to Sherlock is Alyssa Amarshi. Alyssa is a Canadian dancer of Indo-Ismaili heritage whose parents emigrated from Tanzania. In her youth, she worked with Bollywood dance companies and later was exposed to dance hall and step, which led her to incorporate the culture and movement of these dance forms into her life at every turn through training, performing, choreographing, and creative directing. Since moving to Vancouver, she has trained with Soldiers Dance Company, Catch the Vibes dance on stage, and has also performed with award-winning hip-hop artists, A Tribe Called Red, has performed at the acclaimed TED Talk celebration party, moved audiences at Base Coast and Shambhala, won regionals at the prestigious Ismaili Diamond Jubilee Art Showcase, won Vancouver's first dance hall battle, it keeps going, and has been featured in media from MTV to the silver screen. Since its inception, she has co-directed the trailblazing collective Immigrant Lessons with founder Kevin Fraser, and her vision as a second-generation immigrant and highly sensitive woman of color through her collective, her tribal roots, is to create more work and discussion around issues of community, race, gender, and mental health. So please help me welcome Alyssa Amarshi. Johnny was the only one who gave us a short bio. Johnny Williams is a Stalo artist from the Siem First Nation. Johnny is a self-taught artist and has enjoyed drawing since he could hold a pencil. He began carving 18 years ago when he made his own knives and then picked up a piece of wood and began to cut. Today, Johnny asks questions of other artists to get ideas about other ways to carve, and art is his passion, habit, and his way of life. Please help me welcome Johnny Williams. Next to Johnny is Savi Baines. Savi is a photographer and expressive art therapist and currently works as a curatorial assistant at the Surrey Art Gallery. She credits being born and raised here in Abbotsford within a South Asian Punjabi family for her interest in complex identities, material history, and transnational belonging. Her upbringing resonated with heated debate, cultural travels, heritage exposure, social service, and multilinguistic appreciations. She is currently completing her MA at the European Graduate School in Switzerland and holds a BFA from the University of the Fraser Valley, and she majored in photography at the University of South Wales. Her work has been presented in exhibitions of photography here at the Reach and at the Sikh Heritage Museum, work that has explored personal narratives and reflected on the impact of stereotypes and ensuing stigmas in the Sikh community. As an expressive art therapist, she has worked with adults, children, and refugees, and uses her photography skills as a modality for healing and personal exploration. She also works with marginalized communities who are caught between multiple identity paradigms that try to inform, ask to conform, look to reform, and hope to transform everyday lives. Please help me welcome Savi Baines. And finally, last and certainly not least, is Junie Desil at the end. Junie is a Haitian-Canadian poet who has performed at various literary events and festivals. Her work has appeared in Room Magazine and Prism International. Junie's forthcoming debut poetry collection will be published in 2021 by Talon Books, and she currently works on the unceded and ancestral Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories and lives in Kikit First Nation, which we otherwise know as New Westminster, juggling writing and life. Please help me welcome Junie Desil. So we're in good hands this evening, folks. We've got, as I say, a range of very talented and articulate folks with us this evening. We worked very hard as a group to craft some questions that we thought would allow for the conversation to address the differences, but also the many similarities that cut across their practices as artists working in various disciplines, working in various communities, and having a range of diverse cultural and ethnic backgrounds. So we'll start with a question that I feel that both Brenda, Sharn, and Emily went some way to sort of responding to give some context to this conversation this evening. Our first question is, why is this conversation important in the arts? And is it different in the arts than it is in other fields? Who would like to start? Not all at once, we only have an hour.
I guess it's on. Okay, good question. I think this conversation is actually one of those conversations that will always remain important. You know, what we don't want to have is a situation where, you know, after doing or ticking off all our boxes and saying, now we're diverse and this conversation has moved forward, that we sort of, you know, rest on our laurels and think that the conversation is over. And so part of why I think it's important is also that we need to troubleshoot the word diversity. And I'm sure my lovely colleagues here can go on further on this. But also we also want to look at what our understanding of diversity is. We can have a very basic understanding, or we can go into a more nuanced perspective in ensuring that all voices, all experiences, you know, all life experiences are represented at the arts level. Does it look different in other industries? I would say yes and no. You know, in some places or large corporations, you might find that you're legislated into, you know, bringing in diversity into, for example, the workplace. Whereas maybe in the arts, there might not be that same quote unquote pressure. You know, as the evening goes on, I hope to unpack what I've just said, but I'll just leave it at that so that my other panelists can, you know, continue.
Okay. Yeah, great question. I think in the arts, though, how is it different and how is it important is, I guess, I want to see myself being reflected in the institutions that I go to, that I work in, that I see myself in, you know, as an expressive art therapist and as an artist myself. I'm very aware of how I'm situated. So I guess when I'm working with clients, I'm particularly interested in their backgrounds and their ethnicity and making sure that they're also being heard and seen. So it's a bigger question, absolutely, but I think in the arts it's really important that we're, again, echoing Junie, that we're being so aware of how we're doing the work and who's doing the work, who are you doing it with as a collective and as a collaboration. So, yeah.
Ditto. Excuse me. As you see, is we're in our culture, we joke around a lot. You'll notice, you'll see me, and it's part of our way of life is to laugh and to have fun. And but yeah, the question is, I think it's very important. It's to be, you know, to start talking about. As you heard in my bio, I'm a self-taught artist, and I had to do that on my own because it wasn't shared. You know, growing up with not really knowing anything about First Nation art, and being First Nation myself, and to have to teach myself and learn those different ways of drawing, of carving, of painting. You know, it's in me, so I'm here to share and to do, you know, so I think it's very important to be talked about, and so everybody, you know, it's a way of life. Again, it's what is in my bio. It's part of me. It's there. Everything that I do is art. You know, I'm a tradesman of everything, of all our artwork that we have. You know, carving to beading to weaving to painting to everything about our Wolmuk people is, you know, it is me. Quite sorry.
I got one. I think I would echo that everything that you guys have said so far, and also just to piggyback off of that, at a very base level, to me, and I think this was said in our introduction as well, art is the most honest way of expressing, and we live in such a pluralistic society, and so a way of really living harmoniously is to create space and to have space for everybody's voices to be heard. And so simplistically, yes, diversity is really important in the arts because art is important. It is a reflection of society. It's a way we communicate. And if it's different, I have to agree with you, yes and no. I think we also talked about this. We had a mini phone conversation a few days ago, and I believe it was you who said that in the arts, we have this notion that we are really diverse, or that we are more diverse because of the nature of art. And I think art in and of itself is diverse because it's honest expression. However, art as an institution is a whole different story. And so if we're talking about art as an institution, I think we have this idea or this notion that it's really progressive and forward and diverse, but I feel like it is reflective of other industries because it is an industry where we still need to have these conversations because there's always people being left out and marginalized, and even when we have visible diversity, there's still people who get left out of those conversations. So, yes.
Wow, that was really great. Well, I would normally say, sorry if I'm going to make any mispronunciation or accents or stuff like that, but actually talking about diversity, this is the first time in the public talk that I'm not going to apologize for my accent. English is my third language, so I think I'm doing pretty good. And also regarding my practice, more theory-based, I'm going to read something that might be a bit boring, but I think that would be really important for everyone to understand on what ground I personally am talking about on the issue of diversity and art. So for me, I believe that diversity in the community scale does not only mean the representations, but also the diverse range that come along the diverse backgrounds, experience, cultures, identities, skill sets, age, generations, etc., etc. And in the community, if we are all the same, then we will be useless to each other, right? And in that case, a community will no longer exist. So in a hyper-homogeneous society, it's a kind of, do you know the concept of cancer? Like every single cell is the same to each other and they just keep on expanding without actually a diverse function to make it into an organ or an actual being that has a life and an identity too. So if we only have a hyper-homogeneous society, then it will suffocate the diverse opportunities for creativity, innovation, sustainability, and justice for cultural, economic, and social growth. Last, it's crucial for community to have the faces and voices for diversity seen and heard. It's also important for community as a whole to understand the representation of diversity is one of organic reflection and growth of the community, but it's not the goal of a diverse process. And with such understanding, what are we talking about when we are talking about art? So I think I personally, from my personal experience as I work a lot with my own body, I think at least, if someone wants to echo it to it quietly on the floor, please do, that we need to recognize the position that art takes in our society. If we only see art in the gallery, in the institutions, behind the frames and walls, and as the cherries on the top of this cake of the society, then we are missing out all kinds of possibility to make our society more human. We must recognize that art, or in a broader term, aesthetics, are the fundamental needs for our human beings to survive. It's the baking soda other than the cherry on the top of the cake. It's the baking soda in the whole society. I bake a lot, so. In the society formula, let's make everything right, make everything more coherent, resilient, empathetic, and sustainable. So last, for me personally, I think the conversation of art, diversity in arts and culture is how we are as a whole society, as a whole group of human beings living together physically, can actually have more options for our future. And that's fundamental for our development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherlock. What a great sort of way to cap off what our panel has said. I mean, there is something that's so fundamentally human about art and art making, and we certainly look to our artists to express those things that in some cases can be sort of captured through language, but in many cases need to take other forms in order to have meaning. So I think that to echo what all of you have said, it's fundamental to our humanity, and I think that we all know that. As members of society, we know that. And so maybe the stakes are, if not higher, at least a little different when we're having this conversation about art and expressive forms and diversity, problematic as that term is, and I know we're going to come back around to that. So I know that certainly the folks in the room are interested to hear more about you as individuals and your practices, as maybe a way of getting to some of the problems that you've experienced or witnessed as artists and as artists with diverse backgrounds. So our next question is, what prevailing challenges have you experienced or witnessed in your creative practice, in your discipline, or in your community? Did you want to start, Johnny? You're holding the mic.
Yes, that's it's a good question. Like within my years of being an artist, I have suffered and challenges with other artists, right? Because as being First Nation, as a Stalo First Nation, we have a different style of art. And so, as of like a Haida or Sidi Chen or all First Nations have a certain style that represents who they are. And so you see it in their clothing, you see it in their paintings, you see it in their, their carvings, and you're able to tell where that family is from or that person is from. And then I kind of took a lot of those pieces from other people and I created my own style. And so by having my own style, my challenges were to get my art even out there, because I would be told that's not Stalo style. That's not First Nation art. You're doing it wrong. And so those challenges were there, but I kept to my guns, right? And I did my own style, and I still continue that. But I have studied the other styles, and tried to incorporate my Stalo style of art also. But I enjoy creating my own, and so I call it creation of visions. If it's not my own, I try to create someone else's. They'll approach me to do artwork for tattoos or to do something, and so I'll create that. And so to create somebody's vision, is I always feel so good. I know, but those struggles are still there as an artist, a First Nation artist. Within our own communities, and then it becomes, we battle each other, I guess, on who's going to win this round of a logo contest or art contest, or who's going to get this bid on this carving, and so those are there. And if by not being a well-known master carver, I lose a lot of those, and then other carvers will get that. So
thanks. Yeah, I think that you've really touched on a couple of really important things here, Johnny. One is just the level of competition that exists across our disciplines. I think that funding and support for the arts is what it is. There's only so much room in the world for various forms of creation expression in terms of its institutionalization. So there is that inherent competition that can create some interesting sort of climate, I suppose, in various disciplines that you've spoken about. But and I see Alyssa picking up the mic here, because I'm also really interested in what you've sort of suggested, that there is some kind of policing of identity boundaries that goes on in terms of Indigenous art forms here on the coast. But I know that Alyssa has more to say about this.
Well, it's interesting that that's the thing that you left with, because it's exactly what I was going to start with. So the policing of identity and policing of artwork, and it's kind of, I guess, I had nerves coming here today, I'll be honest with you guys. And one of the biggest things that I was nervous about was policing myself, or censorship, or saying the wrong thing. And I think a lot of times in my art form too, being of Indo-African heritage, but also partaking in a dance style that comes from Jamaica and is largely from people of color, specifically Black Jamaican people, knowing my place and my role and wanting to authentically express, but also paying homage and giving space to other people, and not wanting to censor my art, but also be honest. And I guess like navigating that is an everyday struggle. And that's on a personal level. And then on a more institutional level, which you touched on as well, is funding. Yeah, funding and space. And we do, unfortunately, live in a super capitalist society where it feels like there can only be like one. Yeah, there can only be one at a time. Even if when we talk about like hip hop, there's only like one female MC that can be on the top at the time, and so it places competition and restriction in the way we create our art, and the lack of diversity and censorship around that as well. Yeah.
Did you have something to share, Sevi?
I think the challenge for me was, I'm born and raised in Abbotsford, and coming from a community and lived in the East Abbotsford, which was pretty much all white, and I was kind of like the only Canadian girl, only brown girl. It was really, really hard, and then really grateful at the same time for my parents to be so supportive in the arts, and for me to come into a space to really authentically be my own. And then I think my first piece of work was my photography exhibition here at the Reach was Gesh, and really hard to put together stereotypes of how to politically challenge ways of thinking, especially around South Asian men. So my photographs were of South Asian men who had unshorn hair and they took their turbans off. And also me as a South Asian woman going into these spaces that were male dominated, it was not something you do in my culture. Kind of pushing the boundaries and challenging the stereotypes, especially in Abbotsford because of the so-called gang violence here, was a way to open a dialogue, and a dialogue that was around safety. And I think that's something that's really key in my work, is where are those safe conversations happening? How can we be a part of it, where I feel safe to reach out and put my hand forward, like, I'm here for you. I see you and you're here, and I want to be there for you. I think that's sometimes hard to, as an artist as well, we always challenge with identity issues and where that comes from, and so it's hard when born and raised in Abbotsford. It's like, yeah, where is my identity? I think I still struggle with it. I think I've now just coming into my brown skin. I mean, I still remember the days where I would wake up or just thinking that, oh my God, today's a day where my skin will be white and I have blue eyes, and it was such a struggle. And I think now, as an artist and as a person who's like, yes, I am here, I am brown, I am colored, like, it's definitely hard to have a voice in that. And I think especially in the arts as well, it's a type of an expression, but people are also judging it. And that's difficult as well. So to have a space that's around safety and safe issues and conversations is really important.
Thank you for that. I just one thing that I've really picked up on, and I think, again, it comes back to our previous question, but I just want to thank you for saying it, is that one of the things as a curator and a museum director I'm extraordinarily aware of, acutely aware of in my daily life, is the bravery, the courage that it takes for any artist to share part of themselves professionally. Most of us, when we go to our job every day, we don't bare our souls. We don't talk about wanting to be another color. We don't share those parts of our identity in our professional lives. Maybe we share them around the kitchen table or with our friends when we're out for drinks. But this is part of the role, the sort of leadership role that artists are asked to provide in our community. And I just want to thank you. I want to take a moment to thank you for doing that as artists, to all artists for doing that. But I appreciate your comments, Zoe.
The neurons in my brains are firing, or my brains, like I have multiple, one brain, because everyone has touched on at least, one of the many challenges that we face as artists in our discipline. For me as a writer, for example, I will identify myself as a writer, but there was a time when the title of spoken word artist or whatever other title was imposed on me. And of course, as a Black woman, saying spoken word artist, there's an expectation of how I'm going to read or present poetry. So there is that. And so when I'm reading other things, there's always a surprise. I mean, yes, I can read poetry any other way, but there is that funny expectation. There's also another challenge is having that meaningful representation. So for me, as someone who was born in Montreal, raised in Winnipeg, living here and having lived on the West Coast longer than I've been in Winnipeg and Montreal, sometimes the title of West Coast writer is another one that comes up where it's like, for a lot of people, West Coast writer means people who write about nature, and you think of all these nature writing poets, and that's not me. Not that I don't want to write about nature, and I would love to, but it is that I do write about things that are close to me. And so the other part that comes up, thank you both, Sylvie and Laura, for bringing it up, but another way of looking at how we bear our souls is that sometimes it kind of becomes this trauma porn, and so we're expected to trot out all the difficulties it means to be as a person of color in the performing arts or whatever, and sometimes that is what gets you the money. Sometimes that is what gets you a foot in the door. And, I want to write about unicorns. I don't often want to write about other concerns. And then the final piece, and it's not an exhaustive list by any means. So I'll just tell you a little bit. Currently, I am working on a manuscript, and it's about zombies, specifically Haitian zombies, because most people forget that zombies actually originate from Haiti and further back from Africa, as folks came as enslaved folks to the various parts of the Americas. So the understanding of zombies here is very different from what we as Haitians understand it. But I'm taking it as a metaphor of the lack of sovereignty of Black bodies and the larger state violence on Black bodies. So, police brutality, the fact that, the rate of incarceration is extremely high for Indigenous and Black folks in Canada and the US. So when I'm pitching this to people, there is a reaction. So, but here I am as an artist writing this stuff that is very traumatic. Like, imagine having to write about the things that are difficult, the horrible secrets, all of that stuff that your community experiences, and then being evaluated on that piece about whether it should be published or not. So that's just a sampling of some of the challenges. Yeah.
I love zombies. I spent a whole day yesterday watching zombie movies as a way of recharging for myself. I actually wrote out a few words during the whole process thinking about these questions, but the fundamental word came back to me today on my way back to Abbotsford from Vancouver on the 66. So the word I finally wrote down is borders. I'm not sure how many other international travelers are in the room. If you are here, please raise your hands. Yeah, sure, no matter how you self-identify as an international traveler. So I've been traveling over 11 years, and I've been doing in a serious institution art training since I was 5. Once I was standing on the East Tibetan Plateau that was 5,000 at latitude. At that time, I was facing the oldest continent the once was the sea floor of the ancient world, the prehistorical world. And then the other, like the furthest point on the other side, I was at Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, at a little lighthouse called Devil's Island. At that time, I was facing the youngest ocean in the world, the Atlantic. And I wrote down words like social stereotype, xenophobia, and refusion of learning, censorship. But at the end, I realized it's all borders. The world has no borders, but we as human beings set them up. And those borders are not only the physical one that we are trying to, well, I am trying, at least at the moment, I'm trying to get across so hard to go into a safer space for my own practice and living. But also the borders in the culture and the mind that we set up, and those are the ones that's the hardest to get across. So it get me start thinking of how I actually feel about when I'm getting across border, how I actually feel about when I fly back to Vancouver, get crossing the YVR airport, the security check, and they'll ask me, what are you doing here? I say, making art. And they would say, and then check and look at me again and look at my passport again because my hair is totally different. I have different glasses. I look different every photo somehow. I don't know. It's just so hard for one to cross the border. And it's so hard for one to step out their own. I always tell my fellow travelers, whoever I met on the road, if we are having a good chat, having a beer, or have a nice walk down the road, that I would say I really pity those who travel miles to confirm their own boundaries. And I've been traveling so hard to get rid of my boundaries. And I don't think I've done it. I still have borders in myself. I'm not perfect being what I'm talking about, like, whoo, everyone else, get rid of your borders. But at least we need to recognize the border that once we set them up. And I want to finish my answer in this question with something really ironic that I saw on South Spring Island the other time I got invited by an artist. I passed by a door that says welcome. That has a welcome sign on the fence, and the door is shut and locked. I stood in front of it really confused, and I was waving to the people inside the house. They saw me and they turned the hat away. So borders.
Thank you, Sherlock. And thanks to all of you for sharing some of your personal and professional challenges, some of the things that you've faced, in some cases quite recently in your careers, and for sharing what you're working on. I want to move on to the part of the conversation where hopefully we find a bit of optimism in changes that are taking place around us, hopefully because conversations like this are happening more, by asking you what are some of the most exciting or inspiring initiatives that you have witnessed or participated in recently.
Yeah, unless, no, okay. Something that I was actually a part of today, it's called the Jungle Gym Drop-Ins. And if any of you are ever in Vancouver, you're welcome to come. It is an interdisciplinary playground that is not linked to productivity. And that's been really exciting for me as an artist because I feel like everything is commodified and everything is product driven. And I think this has been touched on a little bit, but feeling pigeonholed or feeling like, I don't know, especially as an Indo-Canadian artist, feeling like a lot of times I get hired to represent my culture, but my culture only. And this place is a place of like free expression with interdisciplinary artists, and it's really exciting. And Rumble Theater, thank you very much to Rumble Theater, and also to the Dusty Flower Pot, which is an amazing space in Vancouver, who's helped fund the first few sessions that we're having to just come out and play and express ourselves through art that, again, like I said, is not commodified, not product driven, but just a space to create and explore and play. And I feel like as artists, a lot of times we feel like we have to create this thing and it has to be a good thing, and we lose our sense of imagination and exploration. And again, like the diversity gets lost because we're trying to create a specific thing and our freedom of expression gets lost in that. So this space feels very safe. I know that word can sound really trite sometimes, but it feels really safe and open to express, and I'm very excited about it. If you want to learn more about it, you can come talk to me after.
Thanks, Alyssa. One of the things that came up in our little pre-conversation that I was really interested to talk to Alyssa about, because you brought it up almost straight away, is the intersection between the forms of diversity that people think of when they think of diversity first, and other forms of diversity that include class and access through capital. To the possibility of art making. And all of those things, again, like when we're talking about diversity, considering other forms of power that might impede your opportunities as an artist. And so I just wanted to thank you for sharing something that is an exciting initiative that's countering a number of challenges that artists are facing. So that's great. Who's next, Savi?
Sure. I recently participated and facilitated with the UBC's Asian Canadian Asian Migration dialogues around mental health, and it talks about intersections with race, gender, equality, social justice issues on the campus, and for students who are South Asian or Southeast Asians. And it was a beautiful dialogue and a roundtable dinner kind of setup, but no dinner. It was just you kind of come up and you approach the table and you talk about how your time is being on campus and what does it actually mean. And a lot of the folks were talking about their profs and how it is to be Asian, and how much stress they have. And it was such a beautiful conversation to have because everyone felt the pain, I guess, or they saw themselves being reflected. And it was again, I talk about safety a lot in my practice as well, but this conversation around mental health and awareness and what it's actually doing to the students as well. And so it was talking about resources and tools, and also it was just so nice to feel supported. Everyone kind of supported each other. And so to have those spaces being met and being seen was really, really amazing. And I encourage everybody to, if you can go, please check it out. And the other piece was using art and modality for healing. So each person kind of got up and they could draw or paint something that they had gone through, and everyone kind of supported and did a response to it. And so the whole piece about expression, but safety around expression.
Thank you, Savi.
Well, I shouldn't go last every term. Sorry. So actually a trend in the industry and also other conjunctive industry that I noticed is actually the erasure of the borders. That's something that I was just talking about. So from my witness, I have seen many other industries start to realize the value and learnings that arts and culture can bring into their own industry. So for example, I'm actually going to talk to an architecture company in Vancouver who are doing this amazing project of artist residencies, if you know what artist residency is. If you don't know, just going to quickly catch everyone up for those one who need it. Artist residency is essentially bring artists and cultural workers into an environment that's different than the normal everyday environment to see how this different, the change in the environment will, how that will interest them and how will that change their practice, creative practice. And so for an organization who are architectural, some semi-art related, and a for-profit organization, and they really realize how much arts and culture can bring into their own organization, how much arts and culture from different practice and perspective will change their staff members' perspective in their own work. So I'm going to talk to them actually day after tomorrow, and I'm actually currently helping the classical Chinese garden, the Sun Yat-sen Garden in Vancouver. I'm currently helping them developing their own artist in residency program as well. But let's just one example. So many industry has realized how fundamental the arts and culture, the baking soda, how important the baking soda is when you're making a cake. So
We're going to be sharing this metaphor for a really long time.
oh yeah, I'm sharing this metaphor and people say, can I use it? I say, just reference back to me. And yes, so how much the baking soda, the arts and culture can do in other areas of our society, let alone just those that has more direct connection to it. So what are we? So that's the reason why I'm saying arts and culture. I always think it as the aesthetic. It's not only the physical, beautiful pieces that we see here, not only the things that we are hearing, not only the things we are wearing, but also our mannerisms. It's the core of our humanity, I believe so. And so I'm really happy to see the trend in the industry start to become more, it's a thing in our industry to become more trendy, and I'm really happy that I could be involved in the process as well.
Oh, thank
Yes.
you. Johnny, did you have something you wanted to share?
What's the question?
We're talking about the things that inspire us.
Everyday life, I guess, it inspires me to watch our children, the upcoming generations. And one of my, just this summer, past experience was one of the biggest canoe journeys that ever has been held, or so to date, right? Was held in Lummi, Washington, and to watch so many different tribes, come in and show their regalia, their dance, their songs, their language, and to have my young children see that, and so that's what inspires me, is to know that our people and all peoples, First Nations, are bringing back a lot of the culture that has been lost and the language that has been or almost forgotten, to add to the language part. My grandmother is the last fluent speaker of upriver Hulkamelam. And so that shows how close we are to losing, a lot of our language. And what is left would be what we read in books and hear on recordings, which is sad, very sad. And so, but what inspires me is be able to see my grandmother, to be able to talk to my children in our language, to be able to share art with them of everything, dance, drumming, singing, the language. We do a lot, my children really love doing a lot of canvas art, so they create a lot of different paintings with, they're only 5 and 3, but they create such amazing art, and a lot of people want to buy them. It's like, okay, but it's just going to go into their savings, right? So. So because I have had a lot of people inquire about their art. They think I'm doing it, but it's my children, right? I'm just helping them. But that's what inspires me and keep going with art. Is art, like I said in my bio, is myself, is all of me. It's in me because it's our language, it's our culture, it's our being.
Junie.
So I was going to say that, often a lot of the exciting initiatives that come up particularly where it relates to BIPOC folks, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color, have often been initiated by Black, Indigenous, and people of color in response to seeing a lack. And so some of the exciting things I've seen, so Room Magazine, which is a feminist literary magazine that circulates all over the world and here in BC, they started a reading series called Indigenous Brilliance that they co-host with Massey Books, a bookstore in Vancouver's Chinatown that is Indigenous owned by Patricia Massey. And so this was in response to not seeing adequate representation of Indigenous writers, on the literary scene. In Hamilton, Ontario, Giles Richardson started the Festival of Literary Diversity in response to that lack of diversity. Hamilton is apparently one of the most diverse cities in Ontario. Who knew? So this festival operates for that purpose. And there are a number of initiatives that both get a lot of attention and others that are just like really quiet, basic, almost like, kitchen table things. So for myself, I consider myself quite lucky to be involved with a bunch of writers in the writing community who meet every Friday just to chat, shoot the breeze. I censored myself there. But in those moments is an opportunity for some off-the-cuff mentorship, some of which is missing. I think one of the things that happens is that in the larger art world and in other places, mentorship is almost treated as a natural and casual thing. So what you'll find is that often BIPOC folks aren't part of those opportunities because, it's just lunch. So if you're having lunch with somebody and saying, hey, you should check out that initiative, but it's not trickling down to people who do need to see that opportunity. This contributes to that sense of lack of diversity. So for me, it is exciting to be involved with other writers and folks who have these similar experiences, but also create opportunities for us and other writers.
Thank you so much, Junie. Some really great examples, I think, of some of the exciting work that's happening. And hopefully for those of us who are involved in the arts or who are interested in supporting the arts, paying attention to these kinds of opportunities that are starting to spring up increasingly is one of the ways that we can really affect change for artists like our panelists. Now I realize we're getting a bit tight on time, but this last question is something I think is very important for us to get to, and certainly, to quote Junie in our conversation recently, that's a whole conference right there. So I want to hop to it, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. Barring that, I know that our panelists plan to stick around at least for a few minutes, so please do take some time to speak with them if we don't get to you. But straight into our question then. Our fourth and final question is, what are some of the most important systemic or structural changes that can be deployed to address the issues that you have faced or witnessed?
Well, I'll jump right in. I'll try to keep it short. I think sometimes we get caught up in like, oh my goodness, this is a big, huge thing to do. And then get that whole analysis with paralysis situation that happens. So I'm going to try and keep it short to like little point form, but it's not that it's easy to deploy, but it is about the will to make these changes. And so I would suggest that some of the systemic things that we can address, it can start at the board or governance level. So if you're part of arts organizations, look at your board. Who's there? Who's on the board? Who's there making decisions? At the staffing level, if you're running an organization, same thing. If your board and your staff aren't representative of the larger community, you've got your problem right there. the other thing is that when you're connecting with folks to come to events, you want to ensure that then your events also reflect that diversity. And again, I think this was touched on really briefly. Diversity isn't just like how we look like, but you also want to think of like accessibility. You know, can someone in a scooter attend your event? Is there ASL interpretation? Have you thought about how the bathroom is going to be accessible for folks attending the event? Down to even decisions on how you're selecting your participants. If you don't know folks of color, then start asking and put that call out. Ask folks to give you suggestions, then contact those suggestions, ask them to give you more suggestions. Keep a spreadsheet, because you shouldn't, there is no excuse to say, I don't know anyone. You know someone knows a few other people, you know, so let's put that excuse to rest. And, you know, if you don't know where to start, look in your budget, see if you can do an audit. If you can't do an audit of your organization, some other organizations that you see are doing well might be happy to give you suggestions and consult and give you some advice on how to do that. Above all, you want to do this properly, right? So you don't want to do something that's ad hoc and all over the place. You know, a couple other last points, and then I'll pass it on. Often I've found that as a person of color, someone will call and say, hey, can you do this? It's last minute, it's so crisis oriented, and I'm supposed to fill a checklist or a checkbox that they've got. Get that Black person in. Don't do that. We can tell that that's what you're doing. So at the very least, be honest with us and say, you're a crisis choice. But, you know, when you're also making those call-outs, be upfront about whether you are paying the artist or not, if you're able to. If you're not able to pay the artist, let them know so that we can make a decision about whether we want to be participating in that event. If there's, you know, ask us if there's any accommodations that we require. You know, whether it's help at the event, getting to the event, whatever support. Obviously, not all organizations are able to do these things, but these are important things to keep in mind when you are trying to be diverse or diversify your artist pool and your audience. Again, it could be a whole conference, but.
That's a great start. Thank you so much, Junie.
Yeah, you really just, I don't even know if I need to say anything. That was just so well done. I'll add just a few things, and that's, again, what I was wanting to share as well is I went to the Weaving Wellness Conference. I think Brenda was there too, and Amal said this really amazing thing, and it just resonated with me so much, and just like Junie was saying too, that who is missing from the table? What are we looking at, and what are the decisions that are being made, and also looking at yourself and where you're situated. I think that's really important, and to ask yourself those questions is really valid and has a lot of value to it. And so there's, again, like this could be a conference, but I think that's what I'm aware of as well. Whose voices are we missing? How do we be interactive with those people? Engagement, and those pieces are really, really important.
Thanks, Evie.
One of the fears I had when I saw this question is, if I have actually suggestions and points listed out for systematic change, how can people here take away? And I have been thinking about the question, oh my God, systematic change, what can I do? And I was in the legit life panic of that for a few years until I read this line from the American writer Ursula K. Le Guin. She's a fiction writer and just passed away last year, which is really sad. And here's a quote. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. So I think when we are talking about systematic change, it really comes to every individual who's inside the system. And on this specific topic, when it comes, last, it comes to every individual in the community to recognize the benefit that the diversity and arts brings. to reflect the challenges in the community from a diverse perspective, to understand the demands and potential of a diverse community, and to act and support the growth of diversity in art in the community. So when we are talking about, or when we are hearing someone talking about, oh, I have a plan for our future, for our community, listen carefully. So do they actually have a vision for all the groups in the community, or do they just have one nostalgic plan to recreate how things has been done because that's the only way they know how to live? So when we're talking about systems, we should really start with ourselves, recognize our privilege. And talking about privilege, I want to share one quick thing. I will pass along. I was going to Toronto this summer for a residency and happened to be my favorite band playing in Toronto, Beyond Sebastian. I missed them 3 years in a row. Very unlucky in the case. But my roommate, late time, a queer, me-age white person who had a job and a few relationships, going along, having a life, he just staring at me and saying, "Sid, you realize you are really privileged." I sat there, I didn't know how to react. I said, yes, I am fully aware of that. Yes, I'm privileged to be able to sit in here, to be able to participate, to be able to do things that's truly speaking to my heart. But I don't need to be reminded by someone who are more privileged than I am. That's the struggle of minority. When we have one slightly thing that we can cheer for, that we can rely on to get some support, people attack that. It's easy for people to see other people's happiness and easy for them to see their own sorrow, but it's harder to see the other way around. So I think if we can start recognize our own privilege and the benefit that we receive from that, I think that's really step one to change our system.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sherlock. Alyssa, did you want to take
So it's funny because I actually brainstorm in the total opposite way. And when I first read this question, I'm a bit of an idealist. And I was like, okay, all we need to do is get rid of capitalism. All we need to do is just decolonize everything. And I was talking to my partner in the car about this, and he was like, okay, but how do you do that? And sometimes you're just like, okay, we're stuck in these systems, and how do we work within these systems before we can decolonize everything, before we can be down with capitalism and feel like, resources are limited. Yeah, because I think oftentimes as artists, again, we're pitted against each other in terms of positions, and I think I said this before as well, but diversity is a trendy topic, and so a lot of times what diversity looks like is a visual representation of diversity, which is, don't get me wrong, very important, yeah, because we are visual beings, not everybody. I know that there's disabilities too with people who are visually impaired. However, diversity is so nuanced, and there's so many different levels. There's socioeconomic status, and again, you were talking about privilege. I have to recognize my privilege when it comes to that. And so realizing the nuance of that, I think, for me, community spaces. Yeah, having more community spaces where accessibility is a thing, and I think on a very base level, even before you get to productivity, for creation, for learning, for ability to express yourself in the arts. Because really, to me, everybody's an artist, and everyone should be able to have accessibility to art, because that's such a fundamental way of communication and pluralism and harmony. And in society, I think community spaces, funding for community spaces around the arts is a really big thing. again, that are accessible to all. And then on a very individual level, because again, that's important too, and when I delineate my thought and finally get down to it, I'm like, okay, what can we do as individuals? And I think it's kind of what we do here. It's like having a conversation. So making sure, and especially as a tiny brown woman, that I take up space. Yeah, to make sure that it's okay for me to take up space, but also realize that there are other people here and their stories matter too, and their expression matters too. So it's a conversation, and it's not a one-way conversation. So I can take up space without stepping on anyone else's toes, and there's enough space for us all. And I really do believe that we can have space for everybody's stories to be told, for everybody's expression to be held in high regard. Yeah.
Right now, I think we're in a time where, as First Nation, being honored that we are pushing forward in a lot of places. Like the university, indigenizing the university. We have, all through Stalo Nation. There's a lot of the school districts are, participating in a lot of the, Stalo history, the stories, the songs, the dances, so right now is the time, as I called in our conversation, I said, we're trending right now, right? As the Stalo people are trending because everybody's jumping on board, learning about this art, learning about the carving, the house posts are coming up everywhere at different businesses. And right now I'm teaching the Halkomelem language to the university staff and faculty to help them understand more of the history, the language and the culture of the Stalo people. And so it's, right now it's, like I said, it's a good thing right now, and I feel honored that we're at that point and may have those steps to show that art, right? And so I think I also mentioned in our conversation, like I said, our culture is art, or what is the difference between culture and art? Where, our dances, when we look at our dances or hear our songs and look at our regalia and our artwork hanging around this beautiful place here, and look at all that Stalo art, that's our culture, that's our people. A lot of those tell a story. And we're able to look at a picture and we could pass a story down to our children. So everything that we do in our culture is art, I believe. And so it's, we're at, as the question asks, what are the steps to do and I think we've made a lot of steps with the Stalo people so far. And again, I'm very, very honored to be part of that. Yeah, sorry.
Well, thank you so much, Johnny. In the interest of time, I think we'll keep the Q&A short. But I do want to hear from you, and if anyone in the room has a burning question for any of our panelists, now would be the time. You covered it all. Done. Okay, yes. I'm just going to try to capture that, so a recording has you on there as well. So the question was, if I'm understanding you correctly, rather than making art from a place that feels individual to a single person, a culture, or a place, what does our panel think about the possibility of art coming from perhaps a larger force, something that's more embodied by a borderless world? Thank you for your question.
I mean, I I believe that, well, first of all, the personal is political, and so I have a little bit of a hard time with the question, not in a bad way, but just to say that we are always informed and interacting with the world. I mean, if I think of what I write as a writer, yes, there's my personal experiences, but my experiences are shaped by my interactions with the world, with other folks in the world. And sometimes when I do collaborative work with other artists, it's informed by what other artists are doing. So I think it's more of a question of how are we going to create spaces for artists to interdisciplinarily, multidisciplinarily interact with each other and share their art, whether it is from a personal perspective or not. But we don't exist in a vacuum, you know?
Say it is already a borderless world. It's both a border heavy us. The borders on us. It's not that we have to go out and knock out borders on the world, in the world, but we have to go back in to knock out the borders that exist within us and on us. So I'm actually creating a project. It might take about like 50 years to finish. It's actually creating a identity that has no social construct, no name, no nationality, no age, no gender, but has sex, of course, but no gender, no religious faith, no social construct, but a human as pure as a human could be. So identity is a form of art. Once you see art in everyday life, as what Johnny said, the inspiration, art's everywhere. Like once you can see that, you cannot unsee it. Like I can see art just right in front of me, on everyone, inside everyone as well. So yes, the world is already borderless. There's no borders in the world. There's borders within our humanity.
Wonderful, thank you. Anyone else like to respond? Would you like a few minutes, or do you want to take a crack at it? Sure.
Just a little thing I'm thinking of, to see, our own worldview compared to, our personal view to a world view. That's where we are different. And we need to be able to understand and accept, those differences to be able to understand that art, right? So to have that, and that would be my worldview, as if we we have that and accept that, and to live in harmony, and we would be able to see that art in the world.
Anyone else? Okay. Are there other questions from the floor? Nav has a question for us.
Yes.
Sorry, Johnny, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second. So I repeat the question so everyone's got it. So Nav is just wondering about professional barriers that Johnny referred to earlier in terms of crossing stylistic lines from one Indigenous nation to the next, and whether or not Johnny has encountered other artists who work similarly.
Yes, I believe I helped a lot with that stepping stone, I guess, within Aboriginal art. There's a few of my friends, is Jared Deck, Fred Jackson, Jason Roberts, and Carrie Lynn Victor. we've all we're all around the same age, and so it's seems I think of myself as being helping with that, to get it out there, because as artists we did feel what are people going to say about this, because it is a little different, and we incorporate even little different styles, or we borrow from or other people's styles and then to create our own. And so if you look at all our art, all of ours are almost a little bit similar now. And so it's like we've created our own style. And so I think, hopefully that answers your question, but I have come across those people. That's what we talk to each other almost on a weekly basis, just to see what we're going to do next. What could we do now? Like with the technology and everything, like have you seen out front, I did that paddle, and that's laser cutting, and that's part of my style in there. And so it's, which now I'm thinking, what could I do even bigger, what with technology now? And so, and it's now, I'm not just focusing on the traditional carving styles of our people, and to show those stories and that art of our people, but now, okay, let's get it out and, make something huge.
Wonderful, thanks, Johnny. I know there was another question toward the back. Yeah.
I really did appreciate this talk tonight. Very interesting. And going back to the first gentleman said, so I have a question for the panel. So from what I understand, we're all here because we appreciate and recognize our different perspectives, going back to the worldview. But I love your comments about the border. My question to your panel is that you are all here because you recognize it as a worldview technically from what you're saying. But the border comment, do you feel like it's correct to say that your border is because of your own vulnerabilities and your own insecurities, how someone would perceive your art, and that's why we have those borders? Because we all appreciate it, we appreciate one another, but it's our own borders that we're creating because we are not feeling safe or insecure with someone else and think about how we perceive our own art.
So just again, to make sure that everyone heard the question, and correct me, just so I'm sure that I'm translating properly what I'm understanding you saying. So whether this notion that our question comes from the point of view that everyone in the room appreciates the arts, and this notion of borders, whether this is something that we perpetuate in ourselves as artists because we're making ourselves so vulnerable to the world. Does that roughly cover it? Okay, great.
I'm just trying to understand the question too. So when you say borders, that mean like barriers as well, though?
Well, just how you mentioned it, that's just each perspective, because we don't live in a world of borders, but we have these borders. So the question is, where do these borders come from? And individually, these borders are coming up, and how are they coming up?
Well, personally, I think they come up from how you're raised, trauma. As a child, your community, the people around you, informing you, telling you, speaking to you, speaking at you. I think those are or at least what I think is maybe the borders that kind of sit within us. And it's how you break them. And it's how you're able to share those borders and be super vulnerable and be like, here it is, will you accept it? Will you see it the way I'm looking at it? And I think as a cross-cultural society, it's so hard as an individual too, and especially in art. I think especially in art because it's you're displaying something that already has a border in its voice, and so the voice has a border as well, and it's also who gets access to that border, and it's a fine line to that, I think too. But it's a question that's always evolving, and I'm always constantly thinking about too. Is it political? It's political, absolutely, but it's also, I don't know. I think I get hard on. I'm tired of being the educator on my border, and I'm tired of educating, and that's really becomes a weight and a barrier for me as a person of color, being in institutions and always being asked around certain things and microaggressions and all those sorts of things. So it's definitely there, and it's loud.
Alyssa, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think I'm actually going to merge your two questions together, if that's okay. But I often think about borders and also in terms of the ego, yeah, and especially, sorry to go back to imperialism, but I'm going to go back to imperialism, especially in Western society, and I grew up in Edmonton, and my parents didn't. And so sometimes I see like the disparity of how I think of myself as an individual versus how they think of themselves as a collective. There's a lot more we pronouns used in my parents' generation that I've noticed, and especially I think being from the culture that they're from. And I noticed that with me, personal identity is something that's really important, and finding ways to drop my ego is something that I've been working on lately as well. Where does this come from? I think it comes from insecurity, but also imperialism, thinking of ourselves as individual versus a collective. And like you touched on too, we don't live in a vacuum. So our egos are there. We're born with egos. Social constructs make them stronger for whatever reason. The society that we live in today in Western culture just fortifies that notion of the I versus the we versus us as a collective. But also, as you said, we're creating art together collectively all the time. This conversation, we're holding space together right now. We are this is gonna be like a little bit, woo. But right now, we are all making up a whole. Yeah, we can think of ourselves as individuals, but we can also think of ourselves as a whole, and it's, I guess, like the nuance of that, which can sometimes get like a little bit out into headspace, but dropping the ego, I think, is a way to drop your border as well, if that makes sense. Cool.
Okay. Brenda, I think you had a question, and then there's one more, and then we're going to try to wrap this up, folks, because we do want to leave a bit of time for socializing. If you have other questions, obviously, please ask the panel.
I was just going to ask a question because it's a very hot topic that has been lately about appropriation. It's really interesting to hear you talk about, wanting to practice outside of your culture and not to be restricted by it. And so, would there be any instances for each of you individually where you consider that someone, how is appropriation, what does that mean to you in terms of someone taking something that doesn't belong to them and using it to create their art?
Okay, so just to repeat Brenda's question, it's one about appropriation, which indeed is a hot topic. And she's asked the panelists what appropriation means to them, particularly as part of our conversation tonight has sort of touched on practicing, quote, outside of your culture. And so I think at the crux of it is what does appropriation mean to you, and how does that is it limiting or does it open up new sort of avenues for you as artists?
Go ahead. So, speaking from like personal practice of terms of personal practice, or I don't know how many artists are here, but do you ever have this feeling of you see a wonderful new format or new topic, or someone just have this wonderful rendition, and you say, oh my God, I want to do that so much. And I think it's really important to recognize the why do you want to do that so much. So when you see a format of art that coming from a cultural group that's not your own indigenous group, ask yourself why you want to do that and how you can do that ethically without overlook all the layers of history, heritage, struggles, and traditions. And also, as a person who coming from another culture across the ocean, I often been taught that, oh my God, you are so Eastern, so Chinese. I say, okay, because for me, and people say, oh, can I create something like this? Can you teach me? Will I be appropriating you? I say, no, but as long as you come ask me, and I will tell you everything, and I will give you the permission, and give you the appropriate way of how you can do a version of yours. I think it's important when we are talking about appropriation or we are learning from other cultures, be a student. And I know there are many students who just graduated lately in the seats, but when is last time for yourself or your organization go to learn something sincerely, taking the position as a student? So I always call myself a student of lifetime. I could never graduate. But yes, that's my own understanding. If someone come asking me, I want to do this cool abstract calligraphy in ink and rice paper, how can I do that without actually appropriate because I'm white? I say, you know what? Here is what you can do with me, and I have those books for you. I'm going to teach you this, this, and that, and yeah, am I getting paid at the end? So yes, I think the attitude and the position you're taking and asking you why you want to do that is really important in this process. And I don't want to speak for everyone here. I'm sure you have something else to say too.
Yeah, the question of appropriation is simultaneously simple and complicated. Speaking for myself as a Black woman who sees a lot of Black culture appropriated and used all over, from like music to dress to how people talk. You can see literally Black culture unfolding in front of you. I think the interesting thing about appropriation is often when people take art for themselves without either proper recognition or paying proper respect and all of those things, a funny thing happens where then those folks get the recognition. So when you're telling our stories, or when you've seen cases, particularly where you have white authors telling Indigenous stories and benefiting, winning Giller Prizes and whatever, when, that must feel like crap. And that's just basic, and so I find often that folks want a simple answer, like, if I do this, is that appropriating? And if I don't do this, have I scored points? Johnny's, sorry, Johnny, I don't know why I said Johnny, sorry. Sherlock made an important point about like looking at the reasons why you're doing what you're doing. But, I stop short from saying that I'm that person who can give you permission. I'm me. I'm one person amongst a bajillion Haitians with varying experiences and life experiences. So I cannot possibly provide permission for you to take whatever. And so the thing with appropriation is to be mindful. No one, I've sat in many workshops and we have not landed on the checklist to make sure you're not or you are, But it does come down to a matter of what is your intention? Are you respecting folks? Have you actually talked to the folks that you are taking the art from? If you're talking to only one person, you haven't done enough work. It's an ongoing conversation. And even if you secure permission, there will always be other folks who think that wasn't enough. And so there's always going to be that tension. Sometimes, and this is the last bit, sometimes we'll say, stay in your lane. And in fact, sometimes it's appropriate to actually just stay in your lane and to speak from your personal experiences. We all have unique things, things that make us who we are. And there are also shared things that we all share. But it's not necessary to go grab over here to tell your story.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that, but also on my part, just of what I do to, to appreciate and or to, to be appropriate of my art. Yes, I take pieces, but I also, like I mentioned in my bio, I go to artists, right? And so the families, as long as you're speaking to a family, and that family says, go ahead. And then, like you said, there's always going to be somebody that's going to come after you about it. But as long as you did those steps of asking permission, to use this one little ovoid in my art, and then, then I made those steps. And so I do talk to artists that are from other areas, not just Estalo, and that's where I learn. And then you learn about what do those ovoids mean, what do those shapes mean, right? So it's those things are there, and but then there's this people out there that just do it, either copycat or even with their songs or dances, regalia. People won't go and study or ask how to dance or dances, but they'll go make a regalia and get up on the floor and dance and not know the teaching behind it. And so it becomes more disrespect and as an honor. And so to make those steps, to know who you're going to see and ask permission.
Wonderful. Thank you, Johnny. In the interest of time, would you still like to ask your question? I don't want to shut it down, but okay. I'm going to repeat the question because I love it. The question is, how are you so awesome? Quote, is there a cream? No, I just, I want to echo your sentiments. You guys are awesome. I'm going to ask you not to answer, only because I think you should keep your secrets, except maybe you'll just tell her afterward. But I want to pass it. I want to pass it back to Emily, who's going to round out the evening for us.
So I have her number, so if you do need to give her your secrets. I told you my name, and the literal translation is Seven Sacred Fires Woman. And what it basically means is bringing alive the culture for the next generation. I was gifted this name. Well, I would tell you how many years, but that would date me. And I already said I'm a grandparent, so you know. But what it basically means is that artists will make a difference to the next 7 generations. And so today what you shared and what you share is going to make a difference. What you will never see in some grandchild's life. And listening to you was such an honor and such a privilege. So I want to thank you from my family, myself, and the world. Thank you. I want to thank our moderator. Thank you so much. Once again, I want to say thank you to the Reach for hosting this important conversation. Hamilton might be diverse, but so are we. And Abbotsford is rocking the map for how many different cultures that are moving here, and how many are enjoying living here, and how beautiful you're making this place. I want to, at the end, thank the Stalo Nation for allowing this to happen on their land and welcome us to this land. And so I want to thank you for your kind attention tonight. We're going to give them a little token of our appreciation. And so, but afterwards, if you want to have any discussion, make it very quick because they're going to shut the doors. No, I'm just joking. But they are here to answer some questions, and I know that you probably have some questions that you want to ask, so please feel free to ask them. And thank you to those who invited me to be a small part of this evening, all my relations.